Well, hello and welcome to another episode in the 2023 New Coast of Northumberland series. Today we are in Embleton, and as you can probably see in the background, that's just the other side, the north side of Dunstanburgh Castle. The village gets its name from the people who first settled here, and they took their name from the town they originally came from, which was Embleton in Buckinghamshire. Other members of the same family settled in Cumbria and Durham. Why they moved isn't clear, but one branch of the family settled here around 1230. Obviously, through time, the name Embleton became Embleton. Throughout Britain, you find that places derived their names from the gentry who owned the land there, or the owners took their name from the place they settled in. Poorer people got their names from their occupation. Tanner was the name given to someone working with leather. Smith would be a blacksmith, for example, and so on. Just as Craster was burned to the ground during William Wallace's raid into England, so too was Embleton, not just on that occasion, but several times in the frequent Scottish raids into England during the Anglo-Scottish Wars. A peel tower was built here in 1395 for the protection of the vicar and the parishioners. It served as the vicarage for the next 600 years. In 1828, the Newcastle architect John Dobson designed a new vicarage built onto the side of the tower. Today, the tower is a Grade 1 listed building. From 1875, the vicarage was occupied by Mandell Crichton, who was a priest here, but also recognised as a British historian. His claim to fame was due to him being the first editor of the English Historical Review, which was a bi-monthly academic journal. Crichton went on to become the Bishop of London. The 1800s saw a quarry working here, employing 40 men and run by the Appleby family. The quarry extracted the basalt rock from the Wyn Sill, some of which was used to build the vicarage. By 1950, the quarry started to lose money and closed in 1961. There are two traditional inns at Embleton, the Bluebell Inn and Gray's Inn, named after Charles Gray of Howick Hall. Embleton hosts another of the amazing links golf courses on the Northumberland coast, with an 18-hole course. The south end of the course goes right up to the foot of Dunstanburgh Castle, and the north end of the course goes almost up to our next location in Newton. It is the closest location to Dunstanburgh Castle. From here it's only a 1 mile walk to the castle itself, and from Craster it's a 1.5 miles. The main attraction here though has to be the beach. The sand has a reddish tinge to it, but the beach is said to be one of the safest on the Northumberland coast for bathing. Parking here in Embleton isn't very good at all. The golf club car park is for members only. So visitors tend to park on Sea Lane, which is a very narrow roadway, and there aren't many spaces available. You can park in the village and walk down. It's not too far, but if you were carrying a beach picnic, that might be a little bit of an effort. Alternatively, if you approach Embleton from the south, there is a turning just before you come into Embleton towards Dunstan Steads. Driving past the farm, the lane is wider and provides better parking. It also gets you closer to the castle. Okay, well, that's another brief stop, but that's all there is to say for now about Embleton. Once again, I'll leave you to enjoy the scenery while I progress a little further north to our next location, which is Newton. So I'll see you there in a few moments. Well, hello. I've travelled just a few miles further north to a place called Low Newton. You can probably see behind me, you can still see Dunstanburgh Castle there. And if you look just beyond those cottages, you can see Embleton Beach where we've just been. The bay you can see there just below me is called St Mary's Haven and named after the church in the village. Like Hawksley, Newton has a high Newton and a low Newton. High Newton sits back about a mile inland, and low Newton, as you can see, is here right on the coast. Newton is an easy place name to analyse, as it is simply derived from New Town. Nothing exists in writing about Newton until the early 1700s. This suggests that although there is a record of the land here being registered, no real settlement existed until the 1700s. As we've learned at previous locations, the early civilizations here relied on fishing as their livelihood, but in later centuries that turned to farming as it was less labour intensive. Newton experienced the same run of events as nearby Craster and Embleton. They were all part of the lands given to John Viscount and then passed to Simon de Montfort and then eventually to the Earl of Lancaster, as we heard in previous episodes. If you recall, the tenancy for Craster was given to Albert Craster, and the tenancy for Newton was given to the Forster family. At this time, only a handful of fishing homes existed along the shore. The fishermen of Northumberland often used upturned boats adapted as dwellings in the days of timber house construction. These were easier and cheaper to construct. Most fishermen knew how to fashion a boat, but lacked the know-how when it came to building a house. Some of these still exist on Lindisfarne, which we will see later in episode 11. The Forster family were supporters of the Stuart clan and the Jacobite claim to the throne of England. Joseph Forster was imprisoned by his friends to prevent him taking part in the rebellion and risking death. His son, also called Joseph, was not politically motivated, though, and was qualified as a doctor. It's recorded that Joseph Forster, the son, was a trustee in the funding and building of the Great North Road, just 5 miles west of Newton. The Great North Road, of course, became the A1 of today. Joseph Forster was a very high-ranking member of society, which showed in his marriage in 1769 to an Isabel Skelly, the daughter of a local vicar. Isabel's father had been the tutor to the Duke of Northumberland. That is why Joseph's marriage to her was so significant. Newton Hall was built as the couple's new home, and it's said this was designed by the Newcastle architect William Newton, though this is not certain. Today the hall is a prestigious wedding venue, and in my days as a wedding videographer I had the privilege of filming many weddings here. Smuggling was a frequent activity here, with the usual contraband of liquor, tobacco, coffee and tea, and also chocolate, all being traded between pirates and gypsies, as we learned about when we were in Boomer in episode 7. It was the job of the Coast Guard to watch out for this illegal activity, and a specific cottage was built in 1828 on the hill to control such skullduggery. The Coast Guard's cottage sits right on top of the hill overlooking Low Newton, and has a good vantage point for watching the coast. Today it's owned by the National Trust and can be rented through their website for holiday stays. Many lives were lost at sea around Newton's coastline, and although the bays here look idyllic, there are many rocks nestling just below the water surface, and many ships came to grief over the centuries. One such event happened on the 18th of September 1833, when an entire French fishing fleet fishing for herring were blown onto the rocks, and a total of 25 boats were grounded. 12 were saved and the others were wrecked. All 180 men were saved, and a guy called Shafto Craster, a member of the Craster family, provided them with hospitality, clothes and money to return home. Such was the family's generosity. Like many of these coastal villages, the Black Plague of 1350 wiped out most of the population due to poor sanitation. However, by 1882, the sanitation here in Low Newton had not improved since the Dark Ages. The village square, which is surrounded by idyllic cottages today, was in 1882 a collection of fishermen's cottages, with a pit in the middle of the green where human excrement was thrown. After an outbreak of smallpox, the local doctor recommended that the pit was removed. It's hard to imagine when you look at the whitewashed cottages of today. The collection of cottages and the land is owned by the National Trust today, and the cottages are available to rent for vacation stays. The local watering hole in High Newton is the Joiners Arms, and down at Low Newton it is the Ship Inn. The Ship Inn is quite unique in that it has its own microbrewery, producing over 20 different cask ales. The business began in 2008 and is extremely popular with visitors and tourists. Okay, well, that's all for this particular location. So I'm going to nip just a little bit further north to Beadnell, which is where we're going next. And as per usual, I'll leave you with the views of the area and I'll see you up there in a few minutes. Well, hello again. From our last location at Newton, I've travelled another 5 miles north to Beadnell. But to get here, you have to go inland, come north, and then come back to the coast, like 3 sides of a square. Beadnell is about 3/4 of our journey up the Northumberland coast. But as with all the best stories, the very best is still to come. The name Beadnell is Anglo-Saxon, and it comes from two separate words. Beda, which is an ancient girl's name, and Halla, meaning a corner of land. It's first seen written down in 1177, and it was written as Beadn Halla. Obviously, over the centuries, that has morphed into today's name of Beadnell. It was common in the medieval period for people to migrate to find new areas of work. They usually adopted the place name as a means of identification. So it would be, for example, John Beadnell or Lucy Craster. That would determine who they were and where they belonged. Before the reign of Elizabeth I, people's names were just a Christian name with a description of where they lived or what they did for a living. For example, William Cooper would have been William the Cooper because he made barrels. Elizabeth I introduced the need for proper surnames so that people could be listed for taxation. The surname Beadnell can be found all over England and the USA. The oldest known settlement here seems to have clustered around the headland known as Ebbs Nook, and you can see that there just behind me. A place of worship was built there named after Saint Ebba. She was the daughter of Ethelfrith, the king of Bernicia, from 593 AD, and the sister to St Oswald, both huge figures in the early establishment of Catholic Christianity in England. Channel 4's Time team carried out an archaeological dig on the promontory and confirmed the remains of a chapel dating back to 1100 AD, but also found remains of a much earlier chapel going back to Ethelfrith's time. Each year on the 25th of August, which is St Ebba's Day, the worshippers in Beadnell gather on the headland to hold an open-air service. In the centre of the village, there is another church dedicated to St Ebba. The church was built in 1740 and 50 years later had the tower and Gothic spire added. In November of 2021, Storm Arwen inflicted damage to the spire, which is currently being restored. Just opposite the church stands the magnificent Beadnell House. It was built in the 1830s for a local businessman, but during the 1900s was converted into a high-class hotel. In 2006, the hotel closed and the house converted into 6 luxury apartments with 4 new cottages built in the grounds. Some of the apartments are holiday lets, so if you fancy a luxury stay here on the coast of Northumberland, look online for Beadnell House and Court. However, don't be confused looking for Beadnell Hall, which used to be the name of this building, because Beadnell Hall is in Chat Hill, which is not too far away, but another place altogether. The lime kilns, which you can see on the background there just behind me, were built in 1747 for the processing of limestone into quicklime or calcium carbonate. Quicklime was used in the manufacture of many products such as cement, glass making and water purification, to name just a few. The process of producing quicklime involved burning the limestone, and coal dug from land owned by John Wood, a local landowner, was used to fire the kilns. As this industry grew, there was a need for a harbour for boats to dock while loading their cargo. So the harbour that you can also see there just in front of the lime kilns was added in 1790. The houses that sprung up around the kilns for the workforce was called Bent Hall and was almost a separate village, though today it is all one as Beadnell. By 1822, the lime business had stopped, and the kilns were then used by the fishermen for smoking herring. The kilns are now owned by the National Trust and a Grade 2 listed building. The beach at the south end of the village is a stunning 2-mile stretch of golden sand, very heavily populated in the summer months. The dunes running behind the beach are the nesting grounds for the little tern and the largest colony of Arctic terns in the UK. The main foreshore is rather rocky, and the folded rock formations run at a 90-degree angle to the shore, providing a myriad of rock pools to explore. At the north end of the village, the sandy bay returns and runs another 2 miles north to reach the headland at Sea Houses. Well, that's all for this particular episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so that you are informed of all my latest posts. I'm off a little bit further north, so I'll look forward to seeing you all in the next episode very soon. Goodbye for now.